Are you ready to invest in yourself today? Welcome to the Wealth Builders Podcast, where investment leader Billy Epperhart teaches you how to build wealth through applied biblical wisdom. Scripture says in Deuteronomy 8:18, "Remember the Lord, your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth." At Wealth Builders, our goal is to teach you how to build wealth through applied biblical wisdom in your finances, your business, and your investments.
Hello and welcome to this week's Wealth Builders Podcast. I'm Karen Conrad, and I'm just so grateful that you chose to join us today. And I'm pretty excited about the topic we're talking about because it has to do with entrepreneurship and side hustles, which is really a thing. My goodness, it seems everybody I talk to has got some form of a side hustle. And what we're going to be talking about is a strategy that is going to help you to be able to vet out the right type of side hustle, or to take that creative idea that you have for a business and actually put it through a process that's going to save you all sorts of time and money, helping you to make sure that when you do launch, or when you do that new product or that new revenue stream, whatever it might be, that new marketing idea, that you have got a step-by-step process on how to analyze it and test it, so that when you actually launch and put a lot of time and resources behind it, that you're going to be assured of success. Doesn't that sound great? You know, I've worked for major corporations. I have several small businesses, some that are not so small anymore. Of course, we've gone into real estate as well. And I have used this process in every organization that I've worked in or started. So I think that it's scalable. I think you can use it no matter where you're at. Actually, when I worked for a large bank, a $1 billion bank, I used this when I was over the 3 states and hundreds of people. I used this to test new ideas that were coming from team members. So I'm going to unpack this for you, and I'm going to be giving you some step-by-step guidelines for it. It's not a complicated process, and I want to teach you how to think like this so that when you have those ideas, when your son or daughter comes to you and they want to start a side hustle, right? Or you wake up with a creative desire to do something that you feel you could really do well at, that you've got this practical analysis tool that's going to help you to ensure that you're being a good steward of God's resources that He's provided for you. And that when you do decide to move forward, you've got enough information to have a lot of confidence that it's going to succeed. So, scientific method is what we're going to be talking about. It's a 6-step process. I want to take you through it as well as give you some examples. Some of this content is taken out of the Harvard Business article on this subject. And I teach the on Harvard Business articles at Charis Bible College Business School. And I'm telling you, there's a lot of great information in these. They're a short read, and you're able to pick up on some real industry type knowledge, and the information is transferable. So I've taken some of that information and I've built out some tools and practical examples that I believe you will be happy you listened to, because you can apply it yourself. So scientific method is analysis and testing. The scientific method can be applied to learn a significant amount of information about an idea, a product, a marketing promotion plan, all sorts of things, to evaluate its effectiveness early on, so the rollouts are more successful and the ideas that miss the mark are revised or stopped prior to extensive investment of resources. I think we can all point back to a time in our life where we sort of jumped in with both feet and didn't really go through an analysis process. And sometimes we are fortunate enough that it takes off and we were spot on. But other times we look back and think, oh my goodness, if I just would have vetted this or done a little bit more work before I invested in it. So here we are today. I'm going to help you to prevent that scenario. But more importantly, I'm going to help you to take the dreams that you have, the creative ideas that you have, and apply it to this system so that when you do launch, you can really be confident that you've got a solid plan and you've got a real strong chance at success when you launch the idea. So, one of the biggest benefits of the scientific method to organizations is you stop wondering about things. How many times have you been in a conversation? I know we actually have these almost nightly in our family, but it starts out something like this. I wonder if we did this or we created this, or I wonder if this type of business would work. And it's really fun to dream and think about those. But after a while, if you just have ideas and you're not moving anything forward, it's not exactly fruitful. And we want to make sure that when we are thinking of ideas, especially those God ideas, that we're being really good stewards of those and we're actually taking it to the next level. And with this, there's safety in it as far as you're not going to be wasting a bunch of money when you follow this on a dream or an idea. But also, when you bring people around you that are able to contribute to the idea pool, the creativeness, you're able to hear those ideas and you're able to put it through this process to actually vet it out. So people feel heard. If it is a God idea, it helps confirm that it's a God idea. And probably most importantly in all of this is that it guides you in implementation. I used to have a team. Well, I've had many teams at different organizations, but this one team in particular, we had a couple people on it that I'm telling you, they were creative. And I would get frustrated as a leader of the team because I'm thinking, like, oh my gosh, can these ideas please stop? Because the reality of us being able to implement them was just so minimal. It was too much coming at us. But what I learned is that if I had a process that those ideas could kind of dump into, and the idea people were involved in vetting it out and following this method, they themselves were learning about it and also understanding that a good idea, not to be like critical, but in a way, they're like a dime a dozen. It doesn't take much for us to sit in a meeting and come up with a bunch of good ideas, but the people that actually see those ideas become a reality and start to move a purpose, a vision, an organization forward. There's one thing they have to have, and that is implementation. And if we don't learn to implement, those ideas just die on the vine, right? So it really goes back to kind of stewardship, where if we follow this process, and I think you'll be able to grab hold of it really easily, you know that you are in a position to be a really good steward of those God ideas or your team's God ideas that they're bringing towards you. So testing is used to make tactical decisions in a range of business settings, from banks to retailers to side hustles, you name it, real estate. And there's a lot of questions that companies are asking, and this is a way to answer them in an intelligent, factual way. So let's get started here in talking about the type of ideas that we might want to bring towards this method. And I'm going to give you a real life example of a company we've all heard of that has applied the scientific method in determining a pretty major move in their organization. And the organization I'm going to share with you that used this is Subway. And Subway wanted to find out if they could do the $5 lunch special, which, if you've ever gone to Subway, you know that they've launched this, but did not want to take the risk in all their locations because they were not certain if it would take off, first of all. They didn't know if it would negatively affect their current business, and they didn't know if it was going to work in every market. So they rolled out a test in a few markets, ensuring that they did not sway the results by location or demographics. And there's a lot of things to consider in doing that. So the part that I'm going to be going over today is those 8 steps. There's a lot more on this topic, and I'll be covering more of this at the upcoming Wealth Builders Business Workshop that is August 19th through the 21st. And I just want to encourage you that if you're an entrepreneur, you want to be an entrepreneur, if you are interested in starting or you're running a nonprofit, if you're in mid to senior level leadership or you have a desire to be at that level in your organization, this workshop is for you. Billy is absolutely amazing, and he's going to be teaching a lot of the sessions along with a lot of speakers and people that are in the game and business to be able to help you. So if you're interested in that, the seating is limited in person. So you definitely want to get your ticket now. Go to wealthbuilders.org/events and you will see the business workshop on that page and you can get registered. Okay, here we go. Here's the part that I'm going to cover today just to give you a great introduction on this. Here are the 6 steps that are part of the scientific method. Okay, you ready? Write this down. Number 1, when we start out with the scientific method, we make an observation. Do you know that pretty much every successful business was birthed out of solving a problem? And when you realize that, some of the self-talk that you have or the things that maybe you just kind of work around or struggle with in day to day, with this scientific method and what I'm going to share with you, you're going to be able to start to listen to those thoughts and those ideas and think about them not as a problem or a source of frustration in your life, but really an opportunity, something that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. And you think, my gosh, would it be easier? Could we potentially do something to solve this? And that's how businesses are born. So in making an observation is that first step and that initial thing with that self-talk that you think, oh my goodness, I'm going to pay attention to this. So as I go through these steps, I'm going to give you an example. And it's something that I wish I would have known or thought about this scientific method, a couple decades ago. I probably would be a multi-jillionaire by now. But I'm going to use a type of a business that you're going to be familiar with. And actually, I can think back on my life and I recall having this observation, but not doing anything about it. So here's the observation that I'm using as an example. And this is true because we had this little dog named Bolo, and he's a Bashan, super cute, lived 17 years. But every time that I was going to travel out of town or we were going on vacation, we had to bring Bolo to a kennel. Okay. Once in a while, my parents would take Bolo, but I knew they're not dog people. And it was not something that I wanted to really ask of them. It was not their top of the list thing to do, although they do it to be kind. But anyway, that observation is I dread every time I have to go out of town because Bolo cries going to the kennel. I have no idea how these dogs know where they're going. They do not let him out of his stall when he gets there, except to go to the bathroom. And by that time, when I pick him up, he's absolutely crazy. It's really expensive. And you know what? I just didn't want to ask my parents to take him again. So that observation in itself is something that you could say, wow, I should have paid attention to that. But at the time I didn't know it. And it was kind of like, well, what's the worst, what's the best you could say of the worst? And that was, I'll just take him to the kennels so I don't put my parents out. So the next step, number 2, is to ask a question. So if I would have been on this, that would have been my observation. And then I could have asked the question, if I would have taken it this step further, I wonder if there is a better way to help pet owners when they go out of town, something that feels like home and not an institution for my little Bolo, right? So that question would have helped me to deal with the fact that I was having a problem, but would have opened up the opportunity to provide and create a solution. All right, so make an observation, ask a question. Number 3, make a hypothesis, which usually starts with, I think based on this situation. So here's an example in this Bolo situation. I think there are people that love dogs and would like to get paid to take care of dogs in their own homes, like daycare for children. So that's an hypothesis where you think, I have this idea. And I think that it actually might prove out to be a solution, but we don't know enough at this point. So, step number 4 is based on that hypothesis, conduct an experiment. So, here is my experiment that I laid out here. I'm going to ask my friends and family that I know love dogs if they would be interested in earning money to take care of dogs similar to child daycare. And we'll start with asking if they'd like to take my dog. So, what's happening here is you're taking that God given idea that's solving a problem, right? And you're thinking about a way that you might be able to test this idea without it costing you a lot of money. So, that would have been the experiment. Now, step number 5 is draw conclusions. And so that's something that you would think about. What did I learn with this test? So here's a little example of that. Well, if people love dogs and could be sure that the dogs were safe, they had their shots, and it was presented as a business opportunity rather than a favor to help me, people were really open to doing this and taking care of Bolo. So I just stated in here, I learned that the dogs enjoy having other dogs around, and that when I picked up Bolo, he was much less stressed out. I learned that I was much more relaxed on vacation, and I really liked getting pictures of Bolo while at their house. And I would add that as a standard to whatever this idea, this business would be, which of course we know is like doggy vacay. All right, then your final step in this process is based on the observation number 1, asking a question number 2, making a hypothesis number 3, conducting an actual experiment number 4, drawing conclusions based on that experiment. Now it's number 6, and it's time to report your results. So the results that I have here is this is a viable opportunity to apply a B&B mentality along with daycare, blend the two together for pet dogs. We found that there are some hurdles to overcome, which would include scheduling, vetting the people that want to become the caretakers, payment portals, ensuring the dogs have vaccinations, no history of biting, all that kind of stuff. But I, after this, would have suggested to move forward with a similar model, Airbnb, VRBO for pets. Do you see how that process worked? Now, if we take our ideas or one of our employees' ideas and we listen to their observation, you can actually take them through this template and assign to them or assign it to yourself or a family member, whoever's got that idea, to follow this process, checking in with it. And at the end of the day, when they bring it back to you, you as an entrepreneur are going to be able to determine, or a leader, if this is actually a viable business opportunity that you want to implement full scale. And if you go through this process too, sometimes what we realize is like, wow, this sounded like such a great idea. But when I actually got it out there as an experiment, it failed miserably. And so in that case, we would answer the question if it worked or not. We would say, no, it didn't work. And thankfully, I didn't invest a bunch of time and money on an idea that just wasn't viable. However, oftentimes it might be a good idea, but it just needs to be tweaked or adjusted. So, what you do in that case is like, yes, it's a viable idea, but no, it didn't really work. Here's why. And then you start over and you run it through the same process again. Now, there is a lot in the testing part that we need to make sure we understand. I'm going to cover those really quickly here. And again, I'll go in more depth with this. But when you're testing things, one of the things that we see that people miss is that they test or try too many things at once. So all at once, you're not able to isolate the results. And so an example of that is there is a grocery store, which is in the Harvard Business article. I find this really fascinating. There is a grocery store that wanted to determine, this was their question that they wanted answered. If we put aquarium tanks with water in all of our stores, will it increase lobster sales? All right. So that's a great question. Not one that I would have thought of, but I thought that was pretty ingenious. I can only imagine that it was an employee that worked in maybe the seafood area that thought, gosh, if I want to raise sales, maybe this would work. However, if there's about 100, let's say, in that chain of grocery stores, it would be very expensive to just roll out and make space for 100 aquariums in 100 stores. So instead, to do this method of testing it is very important and determining if it's something that they'd want to scale throughout the organization. However, what can happen is oftentimes what people do is they introduce something else at the same time, and then they're not able to tell. So in this situation, let's say there was a coupon that was in the local newspaper or online that had lobster half price. And then in that same store, they rolled out the aquarium. And if they weren't aware that they had two variables, they could come out with the conclusion that bringing the aquarium in there actually really increased the lobster sales. However, it could have been driven by the coupon of lobsters being half off, if that makes sense. I'm sure you got that. So you want to isolate it. You want to make sure that you've got both the test and control group. And in that situation I just described, then what you would want to do is you would have stores with similar demographics and maybe even in a similar geographic location. And you would want to isolate that you don't have the coupons going. And then you would test one store, look at their sales from the previous year and see how lobster sales were. And the only variable in that situation was an added water tank. And then you might implement it for a couple of weeks. You might take a look at the results. And because you isolated, you would be able to firmly tell if the water tanks is what was driving the increased sale. So you want to limit the new thing you're introducing. You want to understand what's happening with your control group, and you want to make it measurable. So I have all sorts of examples for you. Many of you have heard me and Billy talk about the blue ocean strategy. I love that strategy. And we're trying to determine between what's a red ocean and a blue ocean. And then when you find that blue ocean, this is what helps you to vet that blue ocean to see if there's actually a market for it. So there is so many applications for this. I could go on and on with examples, but what I really want to get across to you is that there is a method for you to be able to vet those God-given ideas, those side hustle ideas, the business that you feel passionate about starting. Maybe it's a program or something in your church or organization. You can apply this method in any of those situations. So thank you so much for joining us today. We've talked about the scientific method. Again, we would love to have you join us at the Wealth Builders Business Workshop that is coming up August 19th through the 21st. To learn more about that, go to wealthbuilders.org/events. Also, we've got Wealth Builders University that is loaded with video content and PowerPoints. And we've got all sorts of business teachings out there. So go ahead and check that out at wbuniversity.online. And if you're not on our email list, I would encourage you to sign up. You get all sorts of free content. You can go to wealthbuilders.org and just learn more about the organization. Check out Billy's schedule, see where he's going to be, and just stay connected with us. So thank you so much again for joining us today on the Wealth Builders Podcast. I'm Karen Conrad. God bless you and have an awesome rest of the day.
We hope you learned something of lasting value today from this Wealth Builders Podcast. If you'd like any tools, teachings, or resources mentioned in the podcast, you'll find them online at wealthbuilders.org. Wealth Builders exists to teach you how to build wealth through applied biblical wisdom in your finances, your business, and your investments. Wealth Builders is a nonprofit organization. We depend on your donations to keep this podcast running. Please consider donating to us on wealthbuilders.org.